Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. And what I'm looking at today is 1988's Hellbound, Hellraiser II. And for my money, this is the best Hellraiser movie produced thus far, including Clive Barker's original. And it was directed by Tony Randel, who was an uncredited editor on Hellraiser as well as Hellraiser II. And it's such an interesting movie for me because what it does is expands the Hellraiser universe and it gives it more depth. The story takes place at the end of the first movie, which is to say you have Kirsty in a hospital, and it is hilarious to me that this movie, for some reason I'm to this day not certain of, playing as if it takes place in the United States. This movie is clearly a British production, and this cop who is speaking to Kirsty when she is in the hospital is clearly British. Now, he's speaking with an American accent, though the problem is his accent sounds too stereotypically American. And I get the feeling it is not an American speaking it. It is a British person. It's not terrible, it just doesn't sound right. There's a generic quality to it. And I don't understand why Hellraiser didn't take place in Britain. The fact that it takes place in the United States is hilarious to me. In any case, let's get back to that story. Kirsty is in hospital and she's getting visions of her father, Frank, I believe his name was. It's visions of a skinned man writing in blood on the wall that he's in hell. Now, this is almost comedic in the sense that he vanishes, but the words, "Help me, I'm in hell," or something to that effect, remain on the wall. No one else sees this, though to be fair, virtually no one else in terms of doctors, nurses, or anyone else for that matter actually visit her. So I guess I understand how that came to be, but it still doesn't really make any sense. Now, in Hellraiser 2, we're also introduced to Dr. Channard, who is more British than humanly possible. As I said, that this movie somehow wants people to accept it takes place in the United States is more ludicrous than the idea of extra-dimensional demons, which are the Cenobites. I love this movie, and I think it's the best of the Hellraiser movies, as I've said, though it is also ludicrous. It's so ridiculous in the way it goes about doing things. For instance, the cinematographer or director of photography is the same person who handled Hellraiser, which means that everything is relatively flat and there's no dimension to anything. Things just kind of sit on the screen. I think his cinematography is really not good and fitting for what he's doing. But in any case, same director of photography. And though to go back to the story, Dr. Channard is a psychopath, and his story is interesting, and he's probably the most interesting character in the movie. And so he is a bit of a sadist, but he hides it under a guise of being a doctor and curious. And he manages to bring Julia back, totally by accident. And Julia is also an interesting character from the original movie. And based on my researches, she was actually going to be the villain of the Hellraiser series. But the thing is, Pinhead proved to be so popular, that idea was kind of thrown out with the garbage. So Pinhead became the iconic Hellraiser villain. Though, as I said, Julia was really meant to be. And she's great. I like this woman. She is ruthless, she is mean, and she's just terrible. Though Bob Keane, who did the special effects for the original movie, is a consultant in Hellraiser II Hellbound. Though the effects are somewhat better, and you can tell that Hellbound has a larger budget than the original movie. I wouldn't say it's significantly larger because there are way too many instances of people running into stone walls that aren't quite stony enough, as in cloth or paper. But it's a better, more ambitious movie than the original Hellraiser, and I really appreciate it. And what I like so much about it is that it goes into what the Cenobites are about. And sure, they're still relatively weak. It confuses me why these things are as threatening as they are. Sure, they're relatively horrific in terms of how they look. The visual presentation is horrific. But at the same time, they don't do anything. Pinhead has the ability to control chains, essentially telekinesis. He's like an average X-Man. And the others don't seem to do much of anything. The Chatterer, the character known as Butterball, the female Cenobite, they don't do anything to speak of. So the idea that these entities are as terrible as they act just doesn't quite wash with me. They're just there. They have knives, for God's sakes. I imagine someone with a gun or some other weapon could do pretty well against them because they don't show what makes them so formidable. And Pinhead, beyond the telekinesis with the chains, it's not telekinesis, really, but it might as well be, is not that formidable. So none of them are. But with Channard entering the picture, we see what Leviathan, the Lord of the Labyrinth, is all about. And this is what interests me. It expands the Hellraiser world somewhat. As I mentioned earlier, we start to see what's behind the Cenobites. And let's be clear, the story revolving around Leviathan is really confusing. It's not well written in the sense that we don't know why anything is happening at all. We don't know why Leviathan is acting as it is acting. Conversely, what we do know is that something is wrong. Something is out of balance because Leviathan, via Channard, goes about slaughtering the other Cenobites. We don't know why this is, but what we do know is that when Leviathan is brought into balance, it restores those Cenobites that were killed. Well, at least Pinhead, at any rate. And as we've seen from later movies, certainly the Chatterer as well. So, it's a confusing movie. It does... I love this movie so much. But as I said, it's confusing. It doesn't really make sense. But just the idea that it attempts to expand the world of Hellraiser, for me, means a lot. Because what Clive Barker did in the original film was to introduce these entities, but give you no real information about them. Hellraiser 2 at least attempts, and I'm not saying it attempts it very well, but at least it attempts to expand the world that they exist in. And that's really interesting for me, and one reason why I really enjoy this movie. As I've said before, it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. In fact, the more you think about it, the less sense it makes. It's not a great movie, and it could have used a significantly higher budget. But that being said, Hellraiser 2 is the best of the Hellraiser movies. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and a review. If you agree, disagree, let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. Peace.